Hi everybody, thank you for joining us again this afternoon for our second webinar of Autism Awareness Month. I'm really delighted to say that Andy Smith is with us this afternoon to talk about his experience of living with autism. Andy, over to you.
Awesome, thank you very much. So I've got a presentation. Hi everyone, hope you're doing okay. I will share my screen for a presentation if that's okay. Yeah, I have to say, I did make a presentation called the 3-Step Guide to Supporting Autistic People, which I made with some young people themselves. But then I watched this morning's webinar and then decided I want to change it and do something completely different. As I got a better understanding of the audience and a few things that I thought would be useful to mention. So I haven't got any pictures in this, it's just text and it's just random pictures of buildings, so I'll apologise for that. It's because I literally just finished the presentation 20 minutes ago. But yeah, here's the talk about what it means to be an autistic person. And the other thing as well is I'm quite happy to answer sort of spontaneous questions. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to put them while I'm talking and I can happily answer them. Anything that I don't cover, I'm happy to cover at the end as well. So I hope that's okay. I think one important point before I start, it's really important to know, of course, every autistic person is different and there's no way my experience can cover every single autistic person. But there is one particular group of young people in particular who I talk a lot with, because it's important to me when I talk about autism, I don't just talk about my experience, but make sure other autistic people are represented as well. So a particular group of young people I'm in frequent contact with and try to advocate for is what I call sort of the limbo children, which I'm sure everyone will, well, I'm sure most people will have an understanding of this, which is it's for young people who are able to follow a mainstream curriculum, but their needs aren't really being met in a mainstream school. So a lot of them might struggle with attending school because of the anxiety that it causes. They might be home educated, they might feel really isolated or lonely or struggle to leave the house because of the high levels of anxiety they have. Previously, I've been involved with a transforming care agenda, and a lot of these young people are the people who are at higher risk of sort of hospitalisation and things like that. And most of these young people tend to have sort of above average intelligence and don't usually have learning disabilities. So that's the main group of young people that I will be sort of advocating for today, and I hope that makes sense. And the first slide I wanted to show is, I think this sums up their experiences and what they have to say sort of as a whole in terms of what life is like for them. And I think I relate to this as well. I think what happens is when you're autistic, you have things which, I don't know, I say every single brain type has its own positives and negatives, but then what happens is when your brain type is one of a minority, like autism, you have your negatives or your downsides, which is seen as negative, but then your positives are also seen as negative because they're different. So what happens is your negatives are bad, your positives are bad, and then you can have autistic people who have lots of passion and strengths and skills and are really truly amazing, but because everything about you is seen as negative, people can become quite sort of broken or damaged by the system and people and society. I just find it really unfortunate that that's the case for a lot of young people. I won't go into my story because it's really low on time, but this completely relates to my experience as well, where I got the best GCSEs in my school, so everyone thought I was doing quite well, but then on the other side I really struggled with friendships and I was picked on and bullied, and that led to the point where unfortunately I actually attempted suicide at university 4 years ago because I was struggling so much, because I thought the only way to be happy and to keep living was to sort of be like everyone else and be normal, but no matter how hard I tried, I failed. Yeah. Luckily, I sort of came out of that and eventually realised that the only way to sort of live life as an autistic person is to accept your differences and learn living a different life to the norm doesn't mean it has to be an unhappy one. And that eventually led to me creating Spectrum Gaming, which is an online community for autistic young people. It started in June last year, and yeah, the reason it was created was because we really believe it's important to sort of prove to young people that who they are is okay, that they can be themselves and still develop meaningful connections and achieve what they'd like to, despite what society or the people around them might make you believe. when I say this, it's a particular focus on sort of the school environment, which often doesn't work for a lot of autistic young people. So we aim to start with one space, which is spaces like Spectrum Gaming, but then hopefully share our views and thoughts and learning experiences from spaces like this to help make change in other areas, so as many places in society as possible work for autistic people. Yeah. So this, for me, is really, really important. As I said earlier, each brain type has its own positives and its negatives. The key to thriving and happiness for everyone is to focus on positives and then either work on or make accommodations for the negatives which you have. I think this is the standard mindset that absolutely everyone should be in. But normally when it comes to autism, what happens is you have your sort of difficulties or your deficits, and then people focus on fixing those and trying to change those rather than actually looking at the strengths that person has as well. And I think it's really important to have a shift in mindset to this sort of way of working, because that then enables everyone to have a level playing field, and yeah, it helps increase the life chances for autistic people. So yeah, so for today, I just wanted to share a few concepts that we've learned on our journey. But the important thing here is, you know, at the moment, I spend most of my time around autistic people, and it's like a completely different way of living to how things usually are. So a lot of what I'm going to say today probably will challenge a lot of your thoughts and beliefs. It may also counter some of the things which were said this morning, I have to admit. But you know, if you disagree with anything I say or you have any thoughts, please use the chat or Q&A section to challenge what I say, and we can have an open dialogue about it. Alternatively, please consider taking time to reflect and sort of challenge your own thoughts and ideas. I think the only way to sort of improve and change what we do and, you know, change our practice is to feel uncomfortable and reflect on our current thinking so that we can continue with that improvement. So yeah, open-mindedness can be quite good too. As well as running Spectrum Gaming, I have a full-time job as the Inclusion Ambassador and Send Advocate at a local authority, which is about making sure young people are heard and their voices and actions taken based on their views. And I really believe in the power of creative discomfort, and which is about working together equally to challenge each other's ideas and thinkings and beliefs to come to a mutual understanding of what works. So yeah, as I said, please feel free to challenge anything. Final point before I get actually started on, on the main points. Why should you listen to anything I say? Well, one, I was wanting to share a little bit about some of the things which I'm involved with. So one for me is, after I struggled so much when I was at university, I set up a Facebook page called Autistic Life, where I wrote sort of posts about autism and autism acceptance. And somehow this got quite big, so it got to about 32,000 followers, I think. So I talk a lot to sort of families and autistic people about their experiences, what's going well and what isn't going well. Of course, I work as a Send Advocate for young people at a local authority, and mainly supporting young people who are at risk of exclusion and sharing their views with services about what they can do to adapt to better meet their needs. Of course, I run Spectrum Gaming, our online community. Over 2,500 autistic young people have taken part in our events and games and competitions since we started in June last year. And of course, we do a lot of advocacy as well. So we have a podcast, we make YouTube videos about autism. A few weeks ago, we did a conference and 7 members of our community spoke at the conference as well. So yeah. And the final thing is, I am co-chair of the Northwest, this is a really long name, the Northwest Send Young People's co-production steering group, which is about making sure the views of Send Young People are shared across the Northwest. So, you know, this is my passion and my life. So I really, really believe in making sure young people are represented, especially the voices of young people who aren't traditionally heard, which is why I focus on sort of supporting the limbo children who often don't have a voice or a platform. And another final important point here is, I believe the views of young people are more important than anyone else, more than family members and professionals and autistic adults. But then there's also the other point that autistic adults also have the benefit of hindsight on a lot of issues which autistic young people don't have yet. So I believe in combining the two to make sure we have the best possible representation of autistic people's voices. One example of this is when I was younger, like I said, I was really focused on sort of fitting in and being like everyone else and being normal. And that's a view that a lot of autistic young people have. But as I've got older, I've realised the damage and the harm that has caused. And I know lots of autistic adults who are still really sort of lonely or depressed or isolated or really struggling because unfortunately they're still in the mindset that they have to try and be normal and be like everyone else. But it just doesn't work and isn't sustainable. So having that hindsight I think is really important. So yeah. So the first key concept I wanted to say is it's really important to know you only receive an autism diagnosis when you're struggling or when you're at crisis point, especially mainly if someone is diagnosed from the age of about 8 or above. What happens is someone is really struggling or at crisis, and that's when you get your referral. So when someone gets a diagnosis of autism, the majority of the time, people don't just have traits of autism, people have traits of anxiety, depression, trauma, and more. And then what happens is you learn to sort of combine all of this together. Because you only get a diagnosis of autism, you feel like all of that sort of comes together and you see autism as a really negative thing or something that you learn. And as a result of it, I meet lots of young people who are really ashamed or embarrassed of autism or hate it or reject their diagnosis. And this has a really, really negative long-term impact on young people. If the diagnostic process was more proactive, then maybe people could have a much more positive perspective of autism when they are told they are autistic. So yeah, it's unfortunate for a lot of young people I speak to. It's a process of sort of reversing the damage that is caused by being diagnosed at crisis point to then get to a point where someone can be a happy autistic person. And one of the key things I have to do a lot as part of my work is helping young people distinguish between what is autism and what isn't. Because so often people are told anxiety is part of autism and that's going to stay with you forever. Being angry is part of autism and more. No matter how many times people tell you that is completely untrue, and I still hear professionals say anxiety is part of autism when that is simply not the case, and it's a load of garbage. There's two causes of anxiety. One is if you're being bullied, picked on, mistreated, or your needs aren't being met, of course you're going to feel anxious. That's a normal response for any individual, not an autistic person. Then the other perspective of that is every single person on the planet can develop those sort of irrational anxieties or thoughts and feelings. For example, I used to have a phobia of getting people's names wrong, so I didn't say anyone's names for years and years. And for things like that, it's about challenging your anxiety and proving to it there's not actually anything to be afraid of, and doing that sort of small step process to overcome that anxiety. But then I feel like I'm talking a bit too much on this point. But the point is, anxiety is not part of autism. There's things you can do for every piece of anxiety that someone experiences. And yeah, it's not intrinsic to autism. So I hope that makes sense. I felt like I was rambling a little bit. And then, but as an extension of that point, I always think a lot about the sort of diagnostic criteria of autism itself and how correct it actually is. I don't know. I believe a lot in the sort of double empathy problem, which is a lot of autistic people struggle to understand non-autistic people, but it works both ways. So a lot of non-autistic people struggle to understand autistic people as well. There was a really great study where, in short, they did a game of sort of Chinese whispers, and what happened was there was 3 groups. One was a group of autistic people, one was a group of non-autistic people, and one was a mixed group of both. And the group of autistic people and the group of non-autistic people both had similar levels of accuracy and the quality of what initial phrase was said when it was passed across, but the mixed group had a much lower level of quality, which proves to me that it's communication difficulties between neurotypes that cause a problem rather than just autism itself. As I said earlier, I mainly work or do things in autism only spaces. For example, in Spectrum Gaming, we have we have hundreds and even thousands in some parts, where it's autism, it's only autistic people. So we've learned a lot from those spaces, and it's changed a lot about our perspective towards autism when we've realized, sorry, I'll get on with it. I hope that makes sense. Someone said, how is the Facebook and online community monitored and moderated for catfish activity? If there's time at the end, I can answer that question if that's okay. But if not, feel free to email info@spectrumgaming.net and I'm happy to answer that. I hope that's okay. So I have to admit, I watched this morning's presentation on autism awareness, and I sort of stole this slide off it, because I thought the talk was really great, and the person who was speaking had a lot of insight. And one point I thought was really useful is, when people often say there's a line between mild and severe autism, and I find that completely unhelpful. So I think sort of calling someone severely autistic hides the unique strengths and insight which they have, and calling someone mildly autistic hides the sort of challenges they face. So I, again, much more prefer a sort of circular diagram where you can have lots of different individual traits and skills, but you can have a sort of low or high for each of those. The interesting thing for me was this diagram was posted on a presentation about the traits of autism, and I just wanted to go through it, if that's okay, because for me, most of these traits which are said here aren't actually autism itself. So I think talking about the reasons behind what's written here is really useful. So if I start with, for example, one point was impaired social or visual imagination. So impaired social imagination is about understanding other people's perspectives and seeing things from their point of view. And I've already mentioned about this, but I mentioned about the sort of double empathy problem, which is about different neurotypes misunderstanding each other. And I truly believe that is the case, because when we're in spectrum gaming, when it's only autistic people, actually, people have a lot of empathy and a lot of mutual understanding for each other. For example, a few months ago, we were doing a Roblox event, and someone got really upset and had a meltdown and said they're leaving the community and not coming back. In a place of non-autistic people, if that happens, what usually happens is they might be kicked out of their friendship group, or it starts further arguments, or they're seen as really mean or rude or unfair. In this community, he was really upset, and then one of the young people responded saying, "Oh, he just feels a bit overwhelmed at the moment. I'm sure he'll come back when he feels calmer again." And to me, that shows actually a really strong level of social imagination that actually a lot of non-autistic people won't express in the same way towards autistic people. Yeah. The next point is about the need for routine and predictability. One thing I really dislike is when people say autistic people don't like change, because that is completely untrue. The really important thing to know is it's the uncertainty that comes with the change that causes anxiety. If you did the same thing all day, every day, all the time, it'd be really boring. Everyone wants change. The problem is, like I said, it's if you don't have enough information or there's too much uncertainty, it can feel like you have a puzzle and you have one piece left in the puzzle piece, to complete the puzzle, and you can't find it anywhere. And it's that uncomfortable feeling of not having that certainty that makes you feel really anxious and uncomfortable. And then people can have two sort of main responses to that. One is you feel so anxious that you avoid doing that thing in the first place to get rid of your feelings of anxiety. Then the other area is where people feel a need to control. So in your mind, when you have that gap in information, you feel the need to fill in that piece to make sure you have that predictability and that control. And if things don't work in the way you've pictured it in your head, that can then lead to sort of having meltdowns or being highly stressed or worried because it wasn't what you expected. And then, of course, the final point is when you have uncertainty, it's a natural human instinct to not just predict what might happen, but assume the worst. So you think of all the negative worst case scenarios, and that makes you feel even more worried. So for me, on that point of not liking change, if there's enough notice or information that is shared about that change, then actually change most of the time is a really positive experience. And if someone does struggle with change, there's lots you can do to sort of help make sure they feel more supported with that. Yeah. The next point was about obsessiveness or repetition in collecting. And for me, I find this really interesting because I think a lot of autistic people I know have particular interests that are really specific in certain things. And while in society that can be seen as a bad thing, I think it's amazing how you can have a specific interest and get so much joy and enjoyment from something for hours and hours, which a lot of non-autistic people don't actually have a pleasure to experience. So for me, I think that's actually a really amazing thing. And there are autistic people, for example, Eminem, who says he's autistic in 3 of his songs, he studied dictionaries when he was younger, using his interest to have inside-out knowledge of English language, and that's how he became one of the greatest rappers of all time. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, used his special interest of insects to create Pokemon, one of the best-selling gaming franchises of all time. And for me, having most particular interests isn't a bad thing. It shouldn't be seen as an obsession. It's just having your own interests. I, you know what? Yeah, I don't know. And then another thing is, for example, a common interest in autistic people is trains. Then most autistic people can grow up to be train drivers, and then they can do what they love every day for their whole life. So I struggle to understand how that can be a bad thing. In terms of having very, very specific interests, I think now is a better time than any to have those, because you have online spaces and online communities. For example, Spectrum Gaming uses Discord, and if you use Discord and join public servers, there are millions of servers around a variety of interests. So if you're interested in bin men or different types of microwaves or vacuum cleaners, or even something really, really specific or abstract, there is at least one community or one other person who shares that same interest, and you can connect together through that. So yeah, I really don't think it should be seen as a bad thing. The final thing, the next one, is about communication difficulties. And again, for me, I don't think the communication difficulties, they're communication differences. For example, in Spectrum Gaming, a lot of people value having less small talk. And what's the point in talking about the weather every single day when you can just look outside the window and see what the weather's actually like? There's these sort of social rules and things which non-autistic people do that we just see less value in because we socialise in a different way. Another example of this is when we talk in our communities on Discord, and we can go in voice chats together, and we can be really, really happy and content in a shared space without even talking to each other for hours. It's just having that connection and shared space which is meaningful, rather than the actual talking itself, again, because we socialize in a different way. Yeah, and a final point I want you to make on this is, if an autistic person struggles with social skills, that doesn't mean they need social skills training or any of that stuff. Every single child needs to learn how to socialize and learn social skills. The difference is, the additional problem autistic people face is, because they're different, they are often picked on, bullied, or felt left out. So because they have less opportunities to socialize, you learn less social skills. And one thing we've seen in Spectrum Gaming, when people have sort of played together and chatted with each other, people have learned and improved on their social skills and changed the way they socialize as they learn through real experiences, rather than being taught how to socialize. And one particular bad thing about social skills training itself is there are millions and millions of social rules, and then they apply differently to each person. So no matter how hard you try and remember all of these complex rules that people try to explicitly teach you, it doesn't often work out anyway. And the other thing that can happen is you can pass your social skills course and get your certificate about being more social, and then you feel really, really confident and ready to go in your new environment, but then the other kids still treat you differently and judge you for your differences, and you get picked on, and and then it makes you feel even worse because you've had this social skills training and then you still struggle to socialize. So it just doesn't work out in that way anyway. The other point, I've skipped thinking style because I wasn't actually sure what it meant, so I'm just going to skip that one. I hope that's okay. And the final point was about sensory differences. And of course, in some environments, sensory differences are really difficult and challenging. But then in other ways, sensory differences are absolutely brilliant. One thing we do is run a forest school for autistic young people in Manchester, and we can get so much sort of joy from just experiencing nature with extreme sensory differences. We can get so much joy in things that other people might not notice as much. For example, some young people could sit all day and look at how the light reflects off leaves and goes onto the ground, and whereas some non-autistic people can look at the same thing and not understand why it's so enjoyable. So yeah, I hope that makes sense so far. The reason I wanted to share this slide is because I really think it's useful to explain the reasons behind why things can be different, and all of it's intrinsic to autism. But also, this feels like it's looking from the outside in and showing non-autistic people's viewpoints on what autism is. And I don't know, looking at it, I just felt a little bit uncomfortable with that, if that makes sense. So what I want you to do, I want you to look at the exact same things that are seen as negatives in autism and explain exactly, you could do the exact same thing for people who aren't autistic. I really don't mean to cause offence by doing this, so sorry if people aren't very comfortable with it. But one key thing for me is I will never ever say things about autistic people if I don't think autistic people themselves will be comfortable with it. There's some young people in Spectrum Gaming who are watching this talk right now because I told them they're welcome to come along and see it. If you feel uncomfortable talking about autism, I think whenever you talk about it, you should think if you would be uncomfortable with an autistic child hearing this, it's not appropriate to say it. That's a rule of thumb which I always stick by. So I wanted to go through this diagram in the context of non-autistic people in the hope that it might help with a bit of an understanding of how it feels when people do that. So I'll start with impaired social/visual imagination, which is, like, again, it's about that sort of double empathy problem. One thing, sorry, this is going to sound really rude, but I hope you understand why I'm trying to explain it in this way. One thing that's difficult for autistic people is often because people don't see autism, they can't see that your brain's wired differently. They expect you to act and think and talk in the same way you do, but we also expect you to sort of follow social norms and do things that are seen as normal to them, even though they aren't for you. So they can be a bit sort of rigid in their expectations, which makes it very difficult for autistic people. The next point, people often say autistic people need routine and predictability, but I think that perspective can be completely switched as well. So one thing I'm really keen on is about innovation and change and things being done based on people's experiences. But one thing I've learned from work environments is often people can be very reluctant to change, and people have their set ways of working of things that work for them. And if you make a suggestion about a changing system or process, people can feel really uncomfortable with it and often be against that thing happening because they like their comfort and their predictability. One example through my work role is I made a pitch about so I was running Zoom meetings for young people, and I said, actually, a lot of young people prefer Discord, so can we use Discord as an alternative? And of course, because it was different, because the non-autistic people want their predictability and their sameness, they said that I'm not allowed to do that. So then I set up Spectrum Gaming outside of my work role, and then it became what it is. Because we were able to sort of go out of our comfort zone, go out of the predictability and break the routine to create something different, which then became a success. Yeah, another common theme is when someone acts or behaves differently, people sort of judge you or mistreat you or look down on you because of that. And again, that's because of the need for routine and predictability for non-autistic people. Then they go on to the sort of obsessiveness or repetition. Of course, this doesn't apply to all autistic people, but when, for example, I go to my local coffee shop quite a lot, I did before coronavirus, and I always got a different order every time that I went there to try out all the different tastes and flavors. But then a lot of non-autistic people always order the same thing. So one person always got a tea with 1 sugar, one got a latte with 2 sugars. For me, that's repetition and obsessiveness. So why is it not seen as a negative thing when non-autistic people do it, but it's seen as negative when it's autistic people who do that thing? Then we can go into communication difficulties. There are lots of things that autistic people really struggle with that non-autistic people do. For example, people can often ask for an opinion or a thought on something, but they don't want you to give an honest answer. They want you to sort of say that it's good even when it's not. Whereas for autistic people, a lot of people really appreciate that constructive criticism and knowing how to improve. And I have to admit, I've accidentally offended people and still do when people ask my thoughts on something. I mean, I make suggestions for how to improve it. And that's me having the best intentions because we want things to be the best it can be. But then non-autistic people can be upset by it anyway. Another example is people often say things they don't mean or sort of have hidden agendas behind what they say, which for autistic people is a communication difficulty because we're often much more blunt and honest and transparent about things, and that's just how our brains tend to work in general. Yeah, and another point on this is it often feels like non-autistic people don't explain things that we have to do or tasks sufficiently enough. So for me, I really struggle if someone tells me what to do. I need to know the reasons why as well. So without having that reason why, I find it really difficult to do a task or complete something. But still, very frequently, people just focus on the what and make and make doing those things a really uncomfortable experience for autistic people. Whereas, for example, in our community, we focus on what the why is and then work on what the what should be together. And often when you have that process, people can come up with more innovative or creative solutions. So they can come up with a different what or a what that works better. So yeah. The final thing is sensory differences. So of course, sensory differences are always seen as a bad thing for autistic people. I explained on my last slide why they can be good as well. But then one thing for me is it's, you know, it's like I said, we can experience the sensory world in a completely amazing and beautiful way, which a lot of non-autistic people can't see. So it's actually a bit of a shame that people often can't see some things in the same way that you do, if that makes sense. But then another important point here is, again, I think this comes with that sort of social imagination, which is because non-autistic people don't perceive sensory experiences in the same way as autistic people, they expect you to be able to go through uncomfortable sensory experiences simply because they don't understand it. For example, luckily I have adjustments at work and at home and things like that, and for my sensitivity to light, which I have, so I often wear my hood up or work with the lights off and that sort of thing. Whereas when I was in a school environment, I was sort of forced every day to sort of not have, you weren't allowed to have your hood up, so I had to sit there with really uncomfortable light sort of blocking my view and making things really discomforting all day, every day. And you know, it's a simple thing to understand that people find it distressing and just do something about it. Yeah. So I hope I got my point across okay. Like I said, I made this presentation just an hour ago based on this morning, but yeah. I think the important thing for me is when you have spaces like Spectrum Gaming where neurological differences aren't a barrier, you can then see what the real challenges are which people face, which actually I don't think is most of the things which are on this diagram. So for me, I think there's three main things. One is, I'm sure most people know that most autistic people have what's called a sort of spiky profile. So you have sort of unique strengths in some areas that some people don't have, but then you also have unique sort of difficulties in certain areas as well. So of course, one thing is identifying what those difficulties are and getting support in place for those difficulties that we experience. One example for me is I can struggle quite a lot with emotional regulation. In Spectrum Gaming terms, I'm a very bad sore loser when I play games. So there's been times when I've got really upset on games and broken controllers and doors and other things. And for me, the lagging skill is my emotional regulation. But what happens is when you have that lagging skill, you have a pattern of behavior. So for me, it was whenever I was losing on games too much, I'd get really upset. And once you identify those things, that's when you can sort of work together to come up with a solution to that problem. So one is there might be some way to sort of build up on that skill. And of course, that comes with age as you get older as well. But the other aspect for that is, well, I'll tell you the solution I made. So when I play games now, I have a number scale between 0 and 10 for how angry I am. If I'm at number 6 or above, I want to carry on playing, but it's riskier because then if I have a bad game or things don't go well, I'm in meltdown mode. So if I'm at number 6, even though I want to carry on playing, I force myself to stop so that I have that time to sort of de-stress and calm down before playing again. And that's one of the things that has helped with that lagging skill which I have. The second point, sorry, there's only 4 slides left. I hope that's okay. But the next point is introception. So, for example, in the earlier slides today, there were 7 centres which were put on the presentation, but there's one more which is really, really important, which is called introception. So this is about understanding your internal bodily sensations and translating them into emotional or bodily states. For example, if my belly is rumbling and I feel quite weak, I might be hungry. If I'm shaking and my heart's beating really fast, I might be really scared. And there's, just like with the other senses, autistic people can experience this in a different way as well. So you can be undersensitive to these feelings, which means you might not pick up your emotion until it's too late and you're already in meltdown mode. So it's about learning how to sort of identify those at an earlier stage. The other point is you can be oversensitive to these feelings as well. So even if you're a little bit anxious, you could feel an overwhelming feeling of anxiety that makes things much more difficult to navigate. one thing for me is if I'm a little bit hungry, I feel really, really hungry. So I never ever stop eating. I can't tell you how much chocolate and crisps I eat every single day, even though I'm type 1 diabetic, so I probably shouldn't. But that's for another time. And then the final thing that a lot of autistic people recognize is they have a bit of a sort of brain to body disconnect. So you can feel your internal bodily sensations, but when your brain doesn't always tell you what those things mean. For example, when I feel anxious, I always feel an uncomfortable sensation in my chest. But I was always told you feel anxiety in your stomach. And it wasn't until I had CBT sessions at unit when they said, actually, you can feel it in your chest too, that I managed to actually make the connection between the two. So I see it a bit like a formula where you have sort of uncomfortable chest plus shakiness equals what, and then you have to do that for your emotions a lot of the time to sort of learn them by experience. And it's easy for some emotions like anger or feeling anxious, but then for some emotions are very complex, like embarrassment or shame or guilt, so it can be much more difficult to sort of understand those. Many autistic people will be able to tell you, it happens to me as well. You can suddenly feel really, really anxious or uncomfortable and then have absolutely no idea why. So you often spend hours and hours trying to investigate what actually made you feel anxious in the first place, because you get the feeling but have absolutely no idea why. So again, that's one difficulty. But of course, there is support and things you can learn about which can help with that. Yeah, and of course, the main barrier autistic people experience, I am certain of this, is the environment and other people. But of course, for me, it isn't realistic to say we must adapt the whole world to sort of make sure the needs of autistic people are met, because then by doing that, you're sort of disabling non-autistic people, because of course they have differences, and whether people will accept it or not, just as autistic people have their positives and negatives, non-autistic people do as well. They have their strengths that autistic people don't have, but they also have their struggles and difficulties that autistic people don't experience too. So what I really, really believe in is the concept of neuroharmony, which is about every single neurotype having the right level of compromise in an environment so that it works for everyone. So it's having some adaptations for autistic people, some for people with ADHD, some for neurotypical people. And it's about having the right level of compromise to work for everyone, so everywhere is an accepting and welcoming space. So rather than focusing on just a space that works for autistic people, it's about having the compromise so that environments work for everyone, and that's what I believe in, and which we try to share information and advocate for through Spectrum Gaming. Yeah, but I have to say, at the moment, it does feel like it is autistic people who are expected to make all the adjustments and the changes. Even though in law it is autistic people who are entitled to adjustments according to the Equality Act. But there are a few spaces where we've seen this neuroharmony work really successfully. So one example is we go to an inclusive youth club in Prestwich in Manchester, where it's for anyone, but we have the support in place that it works for people. So we have a traffic light system for social interaction. That's where people pick a red, yellow or green sticker when they come in. A green sticker means anyone can talk to you. A yellow one means people can only talk to you if you've spoken to them first. And a red means you don't want any interaction from anyone. And a lot of people who go to these sessions say they wouldn't attend without the traffic light system in place because it's reduced their anxiety enough to give it a try. But then everyone uses green stickers anyway, which shows how important sort of small changes can make a huge difference. And of course, we have a quiet room in place too for when things get too much. And again, people don't use it too often, but it's a safety net that reduces people's anxiety enough to give it a try. And the picture below is there's a place locally called the Sunnywood Project to do wellbeing hikes. And this is a picture of me and 10 young people from Spectrum Gaming who went along in this space for everyone, but everyone enjoyed it and can't wait for the next one, which is next weekend. So yeah, and yeah, that was it from me. I hope my spontaneous presentation I made makes sense. And does anyone have any questions? I'll share my slides.
So Andy, if you just, I can pick out some questions from the chat. Somebody did answer, and I don't know if it was from the community, your gaming community. So somebody had asked, how is the Facebook and online community monitored and moderated for catfish activity?
Yeah, okay. Cool, thank you. So our Facebook group, which we have, it says in the description that it doesn't have specific verification for everyone. So you need to make sure you're vigilant with who talks to each other and who adds each other, and parents must take responsibility for that. In terms of our online community on Discord for young people, everyone has to go through a verification process to make sure they are who they say they are. So the main one that is used is we have a video call where we talk to each other and chat around different things. If people struggle with that because of anxiety, or a lot of members of our community have selective mutism, we make the right level of adjustment that works for them while also being completely confident they are who they say they are and they're joining with the right intentions. So a Facebook group, it's really important to monitor it successfully, but our Discord server is completely safe. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think you covered that perfectly. So there are actually no other questions in the chat. But what I can see is that everybody seems as blown away as me. Everyone loves the use of the pie chart and the way that you flipped it. Somebody's put here, love the concept of neuroharmony, which I completely agree with. I think that was amazing. Just lots of praise and thanks for your presentation. I think it's been very well received. Everybody seemed to enjoy it. So if there are no other questions, or Andy, is there anything else you want to say to wrap up yourself?
No, I'll just say anyone's welcome to ask any question that is autism related as a whole. Like I said, I made this presentation. I saw this morning's presentation, but I wanted to change my whole one as a result. So there's lots of content I would love to talk about, but just haven't. So feel free to ask questions.
So I think actually on the back of that, one question's come in and they've said, is it helpful when people in the public eye acknowledge they are autistic?
I think a lot of the time it is, because like I said, one thing that one of my main passions is helping is when young people sort of hate or are quite ashamed of autism, it's helping to sort of flip that perspective towards acceptance. A lot of the time people say about sort of making sure young people understand the diagnosis, so people can explain what autism is, what it isn't. But I think often the starting point is missed, which is flipping people's perspective is much more important than anything. And the only way, well, the best way from my experience that has been achieved is having people who are openly autistic and giving young people, I don't know, I think when you get first diagnosed, people are in a really, really negative mindset, and a lot of people don't feel hope or worth in doing things or motivation. So having that little glimmer of hope, or seeing someone who's autistic and done what they wanted to do and followed their passion, or even one thing which I really believe in is just seeing people who are openly autistic do normal day-to-day average things and seeing them doing that openly is really important for autistic young people, in my opinion. But yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so as we have no more questions, I'm going to wrap up the session. So just to let everybody know, earlier on I posted in the group when our future sessions will be held. So we have one next Tuesday afternoon, and that will be how we gain a greater understanding of autism as a health and social care workforce. We also have dropped in a survey so we can get some feedback and we can see where we can improve things and just, try and make our future sessions better for everybody. And then I just really want to thank you, Andy, because that presentation, I can't believe you knocked that out in an hour. That was absolutely amazing. I've taken so much from that, and from what everybody said in the chat, they have too. Oh, I've just seen one question quickly pop in, so let me just do this. Not really a question, but this is why I feel Andy and my roles are really important to feedback and create change for SEND young people. And this is Poppy, so somebody that you know.
Hello. Wait, can people hear me right now? Yeah. So me and Poppy work together on the Northwest SEND Young People's co-production group, and the reason we're involved with the group is because we have really valued sort of lived experience and our views, and Poppy does some absolutely amazing work about making sure young people's views are heard, and I feel quite privileged that we can work together on a lot of things. So yeah, anyone who lives in the Northwest who wants to talk more about co-production and giving young people a platform, feel free to get in touch with me or Poppy, and then yeah, we can work together. So yeah.
Thank you. And just one more question, if that's okay, if you don't mind. So if you don't mind answering this, what age were you told by your parents and how did they do that, please? I have a 3.5-year-old autistic daughter.
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't actually diagnosed until I was 20 years old. So I was actually, my mum didn't actually tell me. What happened for me is while I really struggled socially and I was really, really badly bullied and picked on at school, I did really well in exams, so I wasn't really seen as a problem. It was only when I struggled as an adult and sort of reached burnout. So in my first year of university, I did quite well. In my second year, I actually failed 2 exams and didn't go to the other 2 because I just reached a point where I literally couldn't take much of anything anymore, continuing life as it was. And that was when I got my autism diagnosis and everything sort of changed from there, really. So, yeah.
That's really helpful, thank you. So we have had a few more questions, but if people can please put them on the survey, and then we can maybe reach out to Andy and try and answer your questions at a later date, because I know we've kept him on a bit longer. But again, thank you so much for your presentation. It was absolutely amazing, and we also really appreciate you being very open and honest. It was a very powerful presentation. So thank you so much, everybody, and we will wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.